Thank you, Busy, for sharing such a meaningful experience of your family. Thank you all for reminding us of what kindness is, the importance of that in our lives and in our journeys. I'm approaching 20 years of ordination, and it used to be the rare Sunday on which I would be thinking about some societal tragedy that has just unfolded. And in recent years, it's become almost the norm. It feels almost common that on Saturday night, there was yet another mass shooting, this time in Texas. In a week in which a black man was killed with a chokehold in New York City. In a time in which, just in recent weeks, not further out than that, politicians promoting themselves and narrow interests are passing heartbeat protection acts in Florida, laws that codify "don't say gay," making it illegal to teach at any grade level at all about sexual orientation or gender identity. Books being banned throughout our country. Why? Because they discuss race or gender identity or sexual orientation. The top 3 topics, reasons why books are being banned across the United States, in the highest numbers ever. And. The list is long. We haven't even mentioned climate devastation, what the next 20, 30 years might look like. In all of this context, being reminded about kindness, about what it means to show up as our best selves. In this almost wild frontier-like version of American culture, in which self-interest rules the day, individualism has become an idolatry in and of itself, survival of the fittest, each person for themselves, hold on to yours and what you got, juxtaposed to that, we are reminded that kindness matters. Kindness, a relational quality. It's something that's born out in relationship, not in isolation. So you all don't know me. This is the first time we're meeting. I hope it won't be the last time, but it's the first time you all are meeting me. So I wanted to share a little bit with you about, you could say, my origin story, how I came to Unitarian Universalism. It's connected to some of these themes. In my late teens, early 20s, I began to understand that I'm gay. And somebody who was raised in a Hindu culture, Hindu context, very conservative one, I might add, that was not acceptable. It was expected, not optional, expected that I would have a heterosexual marriage. And not just that, if you've seen the Netflix show Indian Matchmaker, you know that my culture loves arranged marriages. And if not outright arranged, then introduced marriages. That's the kinder, softer, gentler version of it today. But nonetheless, your parents get a veto. They get to decide who you are partnered with and spend the rest of your life with. That was my future. And I needed to come out of the closet, which meant to some degree, at the time, that I was turning my back on my Indian culture, on my Hindu heritage, possibly even my family. Because to not live into those cultural expectations was a betrayal. It was me betraying my culture, betraying my family, not living into my obligations, not appreciating all that they had given me, all that they had sacrificed for me. In exchange for that were just a few simple things that I was expected to do. So at the age of 20, I did come out. And as I did that, I made the internal bargain that, yeah, I guess this is it. I guess I won't have much of an ongoing relationship with Hindu temple communities, maybe even with my family. But in order to be who I am, in order to be true to that, also, by the way, to not mess up other people's lives, if I lived into the fantasy of what I was supposed to be, who I was supposed to be, I'm not the only person impacted by that. There are other people's lives that would have been impacted by that. So I did what was needed that felt healthy. And it felt like I was going on this solo version of spirituality at that point in time. Now, some of us, this will be familiar to a lot of you. I'm spiritual but not religious, which is shorthand for saying I don't belong to anything organized, I'm not attending anything, but I'm committed internally to myself that I'm going to live the best life that I can live with myself as the reference point. So I was going to be spiritual but not religious. That was my commitment to myself in my early 20s. I figured I can follow my own conscience, live into my own values, a personal, private path. By the way, notice the echo of that choice with the fundamental problem in our culture and our society today. Individualism taken as idolatry, to the point where there is no kindness or caring about others, certainly not others who are different than us. That's the path. Those are some of the seeds that gain fruition over time. I chose a path of individualism, of going it on my own for a while. And it worked. It worked for some time. It was in my late 20s. You know, I almost got through a decade of that, of living like that, choosing to live like that. It was in my late 20s. I got invited to a college friend's Hindu wedding. She was heterosexual. Her parents approved of her marriage. And so all the expectations were being fulfilled. A hotel was rented out in suburban DC. They came, if you've ever seen anything about a traditional Hindu wedding, the groom comes in on a horse. They did all of that here in this country. And relatives flew in from everywhere, all over the planet, friends and relatives from India and elsewhere. A packed hotel ballroom. And as I sat there with joy in my heart for my friend, it was a beautiful wedding. A sadness was also finding expression. I might never have this, what I was experiencing in that moment. Hundreds of people showing up to celebrate something important in my life. Who would? I don't even know if my own parents would. Let alone what community did I belong to that would celebrate with me? Which led to other questions. What about over time, as I age, as I continue experiencing life, who's gonna show up if I need help or support? Sure, I had friends. Friends are not the same thing as community. They can be a part of community. Community is something greater. I was noticing the difference. I was noticing that I'd thrown out, metaphorically, the baby with the bathwater. I was trying to solve a specific issue or problem in my life, but I got rid of something that mattered deeply to me and something that I had grown up with, which was an intrinsic connection to community, a heartfelt connection to community. I remember the car ride back. My gosh, we're going on 30 years ago. I remember the car ride back from this wedding. I wept, and I wept, and I wept. I was so distraught at realizing that I'd given up something that was so important and necessary to me, and I didn't know what to do about it. It was a Friday night. The next day was a Saturday, and still holding this grief, I called one of my longtime friends. As you heard from my bio, I was a former diplomat and I'd lived in Europe, Finland specifically. I called up my best friend in Finland, navigating the time difference and all of that. And over this long distance call, I'm describing what had happened the night before, and I'm feeling this tremendous sense of loss and this longing, this heartache for connection and community. Now, mind you, this best friend I'm talking to is somebody who grew up Jehovah's Witness and he left his religion. That's how we became best friends. He lost his family over leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. I lost kind of mine in coming out of the closet. So I'm calling thousands of miles away, pouring my heart out. There are a dozen, maybe, Unitarians in Finland? Maybe. That's being generous. So on this phone call, my friend says to me, "Have you heard of the Unitarian Universalists?" And I said, "No." And I said, "What, is there a community where you're at? How have you heard about them?" And he said, "No. I mean, there's a couple people, but there's no community here, really. I've read about them. But it sounds like that's what you are." And I was like, okay, hold on. So this is the age of dial-up, by the way. So I'm on an international phone call, paying exorbitant rates. I go to the dial-up on AOL. And I'm then looking up Unitarian Universalist. I get the denomination's website, and I'm reading through it. I'm like, no, come on. Only cults sound this good. I'm going to show up, and they're going to ask me to sign over my house. And he's like, "I don't know. I've never been to a Unitarian Universalist. You're just going to have to go. And you're going to have to see for yourself." So I look up the closest one to where I lived. Happens to be one of our most historic churches in the denomination, All Souls in Washington, D.C., handful of blocks from where I lived at the time. And I turned to my then partner, my now ex-husband, but I turned to him. He was a professor of the sciences. And I said, "I feel really called to do this, to go tomorrow. It's a Saturday, to go tomorrow, the very next day." And he says, "Well, I've got some bottom lines." And I think he grew up Methodist, something like this, but had not gone to church decades. He said, "Yeah, I'm a professor of the sciences. If there's any that was his language, mumbo jumbo. If there's mumbo jumbo, I'm walking out the door." And I said, "Okay, that's fair. My bottom line is if there's anything anti-gay, I'm out the door because that's been my journey. I'm not going to deal with that." So we agreed. There were two bottom lines, and we went the next day on a Sunday as a couple to All Souls in Washington, D.C. I have never been so scared. I was utterly terrified. Now, what you need to know about that is, if you grew up Hindu, this is not what religious community looks like. There are no wooden pews all facing the same direction. There are no hymnals. There's no thing called a sermon. Now, I know, and all you long-timers know too, we are Christian in origin and humanistic, pluralistic, many things, diverse things today, but these structures are very Christian. It was super intimidating. We sat down. It was kind of like in this area, this side of the congregation. We sat down, and no sooner did we just kind of try to slide in comfortably into some seats and not make a big fuss of ourselves, I start kind of just noticing who I'm around. It was all the elders of the congregation. Everybody had gray hair and was over 70. Now, as a young person who had just struggled with coming out, 30, not today, when elementary age kids are coming out, I'm talking 30 years ago, all the stereotypes were running through my brain silently. These folks don't want me here. If they really knew that I was here as a couple, they would want me to leave their community. And the nervousness for that just kept ramping up and ramping up and ramping up inside me. And then guess what? And by the way, All Souls still does this, I believe. They would bring a mic around during the welcome time. "If you're first time in our community, would you stand up and introduce yourselves and tell us why you're here?" I was like, oh my God, they're bringing a mic to us. Okay. So with a mic in hand, I introduced us. I intentionally introduced us as a couple visiting for the very first time. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a troublemaker that way. I take those risks, but then I get really nervous and scared about it. So then I sat back down and I was freaking out again, even more so now. I'm like, oh, the elders definitely didn't like that. This is their space and their community. I have just invaded it. So I got through the rest of the service. Of course, as we were singing hymns, reading ahead, do I agree with the words? My partner who's the scientist, is he going to agree with the words? The words were okay. Christian structure still, but the words were okay. The main speaker got up. It was a minister that day, an assistant minister. Great. Couldn't really follow everything. We have jargon, all that stuff. But the main message was basically okay. We get to the end of the service as soon as it concludes. And they described there's a coffee hour, there's a newcomer greeting in a special room. You could go to the coffee hour, you could go to the greeting. Oh no, I was not going to do any of those things. Absolutely not. The door was in the back. I had my eye on that door. As soon as the final music concluded, I grabbed my partner's hand and we stepped into the aisle and started to move towards the back door to leave as quickly as humanly possible until an elder about 3 rows behind with a walker saw what I was doing. And she took her walker, shoved it right into the middle of the aisle, pulled herself up on the walker, and staring straight into my eyes, leaned out, gave me a hug and embraced me, and said, "I'm so glad you're here today with us. I'm so glad you're here today with us." Such a simple act of kindness, of hospitality, of graciousness, of love. I don't even remember who this individual was. I will never forget her, or what she did and what she said. I will never forget her. And it completely altered my life trajectory. Completely. I was working as a diplomat. Within a month or two, they had me preaching about Hinduism. Within a year, I was on the board of trustees. Does this sound familiar to some of you all? By year 3, I was in seminary. And here I am today, going on almost 20 years of ordination. All started with a walker in an aisle and an elder who would not let me pass, saying, "I'm so glad you're here with us." There's some reminders in this. Now, every Sunday, there's always new people with us. There are always new people with us on any given Sunday. And if that is you, here in person or streaming or watching on demand later, I want you to know that this Unitarian Universalism, this experience could very well be that for you as well. It is this powerful, it is this impactful in our lives. You'll only know if you stick around and you try it out. So give us the chance to tell you that we're glad that you're here, because we are. We really are. And I want to remind us long-timers of a few things. Some of our UU communities on this, whatever side of the pandemic we're at, approaching some 3-year-plus stage of it, some of our communities have been wrestling, in a lot of ways. Many things are reconfigured and different. Some have lost children, some have lost adult members, some are facing budgetary uncertainty of various kinds. And what is the thing that comes up when a congregation is facing uncertainty around money or facing membership losses. Where are the new people? How do we get new people in the door? Comma, or unspoken, as a solution for our budget. That's not what it's about. That's not what our ministry to new people is about. It's not about meeting our financial needs. It's never been about that. We know that, but we forget it. We slip into these subconscious assumptions that, oh, if there's a shortfall, now we need new people. Now we need new people. It's a reminder not to slip into that subconscious thinking. I want to also remind us, those of us who are long-timers, we heard in Busy's story this beautiful sense of claiming belonging, and yes, that is critical. Those of us who are long-timers, it is because at some point in time we have learned internally to claim Unitarian Universalism as our own. No one will ever take it away from us after we claim it ourselves. But claiming it is not something external. It's not something anybody else can hand to us, but once we have claimed it as our own, it is ours, and no one can take it from us. But there's a thing that precedes the claiming, and the thing that precedes the claiming is the conveying of a sense of belonging. That is something that is offered by others. That is a gift. And it is received often by folks who are brand new, with such earnestness, because we're looking at if you remember, if some of you have had that own experience yourself, you're looking for any little micro sign of, might I belong or might I not belong, or what is this community really about? We literally, for any little micro sign. And so when, out of a place of love and generosity, hospitality and kindness, we extend not just a micro sign, but a big one, a significant one, such as, I'm so glad you're here with us. Let me embrace you. Not a small sign, maybe a medium one or even a large one. It matters. It truly matters. In these reminders, we Unitarian Universalists who, oh my goodness, do we love bickering amongst ourselves. That's a whole nother sermon I could give on another day. Remember who we are collectively. It's not the little things we bicker over with one another. We are mostly a people that mostly, not uniformly, but mostly agree with one another from a place of shared values, deeply held shared values. Where else do you find people who, like, on 80-85% of stuff, we're usually in broad agreement with one another? Remember who we are. Yes, there is difference, but we are a people who have a direction, have shared values, have a deep sense of understanding of what we're committed to. Remember why we are who we are. It's not for the perpetuation of communities alone. It's for the business, the calling of touching hearts and minds, of helping people learn and grow and be our best self, your best self. That's done together in community. That's not the path of the loner. Our potential to change lives and save lives is central to why we exist. All the more reason why we must remember and hold closely and dearly that who we are as a faith, who we are together as Unitarian Universalists, is precious, it is life-saving, and it matters. May we hold that closely and dearly in our hearts.